Donald Trump is going to make sure that we have at least a supply of the essentials, such as penicillin and others, of which we're completely dependent upon China at the moment.
Caroline Levitt is saying today that the administration is actively looking at 15 trade deals. A lot of our listeners will just be wondering, what are the chances of Britain being amongst those, do you think?
Well, I don't think Britain or the United States has a better friend than Britain, and we've always stood shoulder to pardon me, side by side every time. And I think in this case it's going to continue to be that way. The point is that there have been these tremendous tariffs against American products, and manufacturing has been cut in half in the last 20 years as a percentage of the total manufacturing in the country. America has been lost, and all it wants to do is to say, why don't we reduce the opposition tariffs? If you're a politician and you're a diplomat, then you talk and talk and talk. This is a businessman. He said, I'll tell you what, we're going to do the same thing to you. And what happens? Everybody says, okay, fine, let's work on this. So I think that we're going to see a tremendous increase in trade. We're going to see a collapse of these burdens of tariffs on both sides. And this is the way that a businessman does it instead of a diplomat.
But we've already seen the president announce this 90-day pause on those additional tariffs that were originally announced. China, of course, is the exception to that. We saw just before that tariffs announced and then pulled back again on both Canada and Mexico. Do you think, though, that some of the uncertainty about this is actually going to undermine that policy? Because surely businesses won't want to risk moving their businesses to the US when they simply don't know what the tariff policy is going to be next week.
Well, that's a very good point. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is that you have these talks going on for months after months and year after year, and you're never really sure what's going to happen. This way, it's happening rapidly. It's going to be all over in less than a year for sure. And that's the best way to have investment and the future to be stabilized is to get on with it. And as I repeat, this isn't done in the standard, let's meet 6 weeks from now 6 months, now next year we're making headway, all that's where nobody does anything. This thing is actually going to be handled, and we've seen across the board, and particularly our friends in Europe, that say enough of this. We've taxed every American car 26%. You only tax us 2%. That's not fair. Let's do better than that. And we're going to make tremendous progress. And if you're from the diplomatic school where you only make one deal every 20, 30 years, this has to be very disconcerting. If you're from the business school where you have to make a decision every 3 months, every 90 days, this is the way it should be done.
Well, we've seen Britain decide not to impose countermeasures, to keep talking, to try to negotiate a deal. Do you think that is the right approach from the British government?
Oh, absolutely. Like I say, there's no desire to disrupt trade. There's just a desire to have it be fair. And what has happened in Europe in the last decade or so has really been unfortunate. As 20 years ago, the American economy and the European Union economy were the same size. And now the EU is only half the size of the American economy. This idea of not producing any energy and the global warming and all the excuses to not produce things has really tied them up. And I think Britain is going to lead the way for all of Europe as to how we get back into the business of providing goods and services to other folks fairly.
Well, at the moment, Britain's trying to negotiate a reset with the EU. There is talk of a deal on some of its live products, on veterinary products and so on. Would that help or hinder Britain's chances of getting a trade deal with the US?
Oh, it wouldn't hinder it at all. It would benefit. The thing is, the United States wants free trade, and the Chinese they've been on a systematic program, coupled by funding the proper people, such as Iran and others. But they've been on a system of being able. Let's just put it this way. For 200 years, Britain controlled the seas because they controlled all the tight spots. They controlled Gibraltar and the Straits of Hormuz and Suez and Singapore. Wherever the tight spots were, they controlled the seas. That's the way it was done. Well, let's just take that militarily or domestically, and you see that's what the Chinese have done. They've taken all of the key components to make a Mercedes, to make a computer, to make a camera, to make it all, and they have isolated so that they can be able to control the entire world. And it wasn't until about 10 or 12 years ago that Donald Trump said, this isn't a very bright thing to do. And so Samsung and Mercedes and other folks began to withdraw a bit and began to make sure they weren't so dependent on China. China has now doubled down and made it even worse. And so what I think we are about to enter into is a free trade zone among the Western Hemisphere, among Britain, among the Indians and elsewhere. And you're going to see China using their old leverage points to think that they can tell the rest of the world what to do. And they're going to find out that they can't. And it was just in the nick of time, in my judgment. It took a special leader to bring it about. And I think it's going to be beneficial for all of us who love freedom and free enterprise.
Well, I mean, Britain is itself now increasingly wary of Chinese involvement after the Chinese involvement in British Steel and the concern about the steelworks at Scunthorpe. But what we've seen is President Xi visiting Vietnam, going on to talk to the Malaysians. Aren't the Chinese simply going to find their own alternative markets, given that the current tariff regime effectively prices Chinese goods out of the US market?
Well, and by doing that, we will not be subject to their veto. What happens is, particularly in Southeast Asia, these folks do not want to be under the thumb of the Chinese. And the Chinese are trying to show a different face. But under the Road and Belt Initiative, they've made these loans to Nepal and to Thailand and all these other places. And then they come in and they demand more and more to take over their airports and to take over their water systems and all. And we're now in the second phase of that. That sounded good when they were throwing money all across Africa and all across South America and Southeast Asia. But now they've seen the other side of that. And there is a real desire. I just take Panama as an example. They came in and they gave them all of the really largesse. They didn't demand much of Panama at all. They said, we just want to help you. We want to have security at both ends of the canal. Well, now they find out they have manipulated the economy. They're digging a tunnel underneath the Panama Canal, putting a bridge over top so that any transportation that goes through there, they found out that they're using Panama, and Panama has said to the United States, will you come and rescue us? That's just one example. I can give you several in Southeast Asia as well. The one in
so do you think President Trump's still going to try and take control of the Panama Canal?
Oh, absolutely. The Panamanians have asked him to. They pleaded with him to do it, and he's going to. That's correct. The one country that China really has the most leverage with is Vietnam, and it'll be interesting to see how they're able to work, because they have been very solicitous to the West, and now China, as you saw, Xi was down there yesterday. We'll see what happens, and that's their best lever.
You said that the Trump administration ultimately wants free trade, but we're hearing now that President Trump is considering tariffs on pharmaceutical imports, something else that would hit the British economy. Is he really going to go ahead with that, even though that would increase the prices of drugs for US citizens as well as others?
Yeah, Carol, there are some things that you just have to have yourself. And pharmaceuticals is certainly one of those. Chips are another one. George Bush gave a presidential waiver to use Chinese chips in our F-16s and F-18s. The absurdity of that is difficult to grasp. So there are some things that for your own security and your safety in your own family, you have to have your own refrigerator and your own source of water. There's some things that you just have to have, and pharmaceuticals is one of them. We saw during the COVID that we have made ourselves voluntarily dependent upon China for our own health, and that was just stupid is what it was. And Donald Trump is going to make sure that we have at least a supply of the essentials, such as penicillin and others, of which we're completely dependent upon China at the moment.
So there could well be pharmaceutical tariffs, for example, on drugs from the UK, from big companies like AstraZeneca.
Well, to a degree, but Britain is strong and powerful, and they're going to be able to sell elsewhere. The idea that the United States is not completely dependent upon importation of pharmaceuticals is not going to do permanent harm to the British system, in my judgment. You're right; there'll be a little bit of loss of market, but it won't be extensive. Remember, only 11% of our economy is imports to start with. And by the time you adjust that for cars and other things, there are just a handful of things that Donald Trump is smart enough to say, never again do I have to beg on my knees to have my people survive. That's an irresponsible father. It's an irresponsible leader.
Marcus, one of our listeners, has been getting in touch and he says, why is the complete lawlessness of the Trump tariffs not a matter of our discussion in the UK? We need to team up, he says, with law-abiding partner countries like Canada and the EU to remind the US that international law counts. I mean, what about his concern there that these tariffs are a breach of World Trade Organization laws?
Well, if they were, then the word reciprocal wouldn't work, would it? So the idea that the leverage is the fact that what is being done to American products is being reciprocated. That's what this fight is all about. And we've just never had we haven't had a leader for 40 years that wanted to assert themselves. And so I'm sure it's a shock to the system. But there's no complaint from our friend here. He didn't complain about the tariffs on American products, whether it be agricultural or steel or anything else. But the second America tries to right it a bit, he says, oh, well, that's unfair. Well, American people, I repeat, this is the third generation since the Second World War, and they've sacrificed and sacrificed for the peace and stability of others without as much as a thank you. We didn't really want one, but we just, it would have been cute. But now this arrogance in the United Nations of constantly expecting America to keep the sea lanes free and to maintain the internet and do all these things, and then we can still stab them in the back at will. We have a generation that says, no, we want a level playing field. That means that the tariffs on American products will be reciprocated to your products.
Bob McEwen, former Republican congressman, executive director of the Council for National Policy. Great to speak to you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you much.